Welcome to a presentation on culturally responsive evaluation and assessment. My name is Chaya Braxton. I'm a second-year doctoral student in Western Michigan University's EMR program. And here are all of my identities. I'm a mom, a daughter, sister, friend, transit advocate, narrative strategist, public servant, like literally work for the government. I'm a writer and a spades player. And you'll find out a little bit why naming that is going to be important to this approach that we're discussing today. This slide really captures the philosophical heart of our work today. The message is clear that CREA is not just a methodology, it really is a stance. And so this is my wall of inspo. Let's look at a quote from the father of CREA, and we'll look at a bit about kind of what he believes a little later. His name is Stafford Hood, and he says to be culturally responsive is to recognize that culture is not an afterthought, but a central organizing factor in how people make meaning of their lives and experiences. This fundamentally challenges the idea of a culture neutral evaluation, right? And look at the second quote. CREA is not a methodology, but a stance, one that shapes how we choose, adapt, and apply methods. Finally, Run DMC. It's like that, and that's the way it is. It's a powerful, informal affirmation. In the context of CREA, it means that we acknowledge and affirm the lived realities of communities we serve, their culture, their history, and their context of the truth, and our evaluation must reflect that. It just is the way it is. So what is CREA? The core philosophy, or even what defines it, it's a complete philosophical shift from traditional evaluation that often claims what traditional evaluations often claim to be culture free and objective, but CREA argues that assessment and testing are inherently not culturally neutral. It never is. And this approach prioritizes the collective well being and community knowledge as forms of evidence. This is resistance to ideologies that elevate the individual over community. So in CREA, we are elevating the community over the individual. And for evaluators, it means that there's a shift in your posture. You're a learner first, right? You have to be self-aware of your own cultural lens, privilege, and biases. And also actively monitor the power dynamics in every part of the evaluation process to ensure ethical practice. And we'll look at that a little later when we talk about the framework. So let's get into the key founders. There are several evaluator scholars or scholar practitioners, I like to call them, that kind of shaped the origins of CREA. Stafford Hood. He actually coined the term in 1998, and basically he argued that evaluation and testing are not culturally neutral. He insisted that validity must go beyond statistical soundness to include cultural fairness, meaning a test can't be considered valid if cultural groups are disadvantaged. And his work really changed assessment by demanding equity and incorporating authentic cultural knowledge to really serve real communities. We also see here Rodney Hopson, who distinguishes the framework as explicitly political. He takes it a little step further than Hood, and he says we're not just trying to get cultural meaning, but we are trying to achieve social transformation rather than just merely a culturally sensitive methodology. And he really centers the systemic nature of power, colonialism, and historical inequities. He's totally shifting the focus to actively advancing social justice and demanding evaluators, quote, reclaim, literally in his own words, reclaim knowledge at the margins. When we see Karen Kirkhart, she provided crucial, like super crucial theoretical underpinning by introducing multicultural validity. She argued that validity is not only just a technical concept, that we see in like a lot of measurement studies, but is also an ethical one that's rooted in consequences. She says that if evaluation is not valid, it will produce harmful, exclusionary, or even inequitable outcomes. Really fascinating. Interestingly enough, I sat in a workshop with her on demystifying validity, and it was really fascinating, the way she posited this idea of um, or introduced that there are different ways of knowing. And we have Jennifer Greene, who really is a central figure in integrating mixed methodology in a CREA. She views mixed methods as deeply philosophical, to honoring diverse perspectives and ways of knowing. And she challenges evaluators to capture the nuance, context, and meaning, asserting that people's experiences and stories must inform the conclusions. So when we're talking about CREA, the path to CREA, it really is important to understand that it didn't happen in a vacuum, right? So many of the founding or the early scholars like Stafford Hood, Hopson, Kirkhart, and Greene inherited the discipline from earlier scholars than them. Um, and we can track this evolution in two waves. One, I guess scholars who formalized the rigor of evaluation, and then those who like kind of shifted the focus to context. So what we're doing is, well, look at Donald Campbell, and in this first group, they formalize evaluation, but I would even argue that they often overlook the role of culture, identity, and lived experience. So Campbell argued that strong research design protects evaluators from drawing false conclusions. We have Cronbach, who asserted that validity is not fixed, it must evolve based on context and use. And Scriven, who many of us reference in our program all the time, offered that evaluators must make defensible value judgment value judgments rather than just reporting findings, right? And then Carol Weiss, she emphasized that evaluation must meaningfully, I always get this word messed up, meaningfully inform public decisions and policy choices. So these scholars who I just named, they shaped evaluation as as empirical entity, but their approaches often overlook culture, which CREA later challenges by demanding universality or generalization becomes more multicultural. And so we see this shift with Robert Stake actually influenced Stafford Hood. So basically, when we see the contextual shift, knowledge is socially constructed. This group paved the way for CREA by arguing that knowledge is socially constructed and cannot be separated from its context, right? So Stake argued that evaluation must begin with what some people say stakeholders, I like to say interest holders, value and experience directly. So Stake argued that evaluation must begin with uh, what stakeholders value and experience directly. Egon Guba asserted that objectivity is not attainable because meaning emerges through interaction and negotiation. Ivana Lincoln, Ivana Lincoln introduced the idea that evaluation must present multiple truths rather than privilege a single dominant perspective. So this shift is critical. It allowed evidence to be understood as multidimensional, capturing lived experiences and social realities alongside quantitative outcomes. Which this laid the conceptual groundwork for the CREA emphasis on culture and context. You see those pictures there? Yes, these are more contemporary scholars. April of 2025, I attended the International Conference for Culturally Responsive Evaluators in Chicago, and I had the pleasure, the honor of meeting and sitting in workshop with Hazel Simonet, Aisha Boyce, and Jory Hall. They are contemporary scholars of CREA. So Hazel Simonet advances the idea of the evaluator as an instrument. She pushed CRE or CREA towards system change and organizational limitations, past them. And cultural humility is key, right, for Hazel Simonet. Aisha Boyce integrated cultural responsiveness into evaluation training programs and STEM curriculum. And Dr. Jory Hall, advanced CREA focus groups as a qualitative method. So she specializes in highlighting capacity building, especially for organizations. So, what's the purpose of CREA? CREA ensures evaluation respects cultural context, elevates community knowledge, not just expert voices, addresses inequities in program design, implementation, and outcomes, and promotes trust and relevance in findings. Basically, CREA is redistributing power, is shifting systems, and is driving social change. So the methodology of CREA is really a philosophical commitment. It's not just a checklist of techniques. We prioritize the cultural and contextual responsiveness of priority populations that are understudied. And this requires moving beyond purely quantitative approaches. We have to heavily lean on qualitative and mixed methods. And so, our earlier conversation about Jennifer Greene, she stresses the need to intentionally integrate both to capture the full complexity of the human experience. So, it's numbers and narrative. And for any project involving, like, for example, Indigenous communities, we have to strictly use Indigenous methodologies that respect nation to nation sovereignty, for example, and cultural frameworks. This is a non negotiable step for ethical practice. A great example of a responsive technique is one you've heard about, the power of storytelling or story making. It captures nuanced, context rich data and drives policy, as demonstrated by um, the Richmond Zero Fair success in Richmond, Virginia, when we used writers' voices and narrative and public commenting to convince the voting entity to extend zero fare, meaning everyone takes the bus for free in the city until 2026. Is a classic CREA approach. And you can see here that um, the CREA framework places culture at every stage, beginning with design. Every stage of the evaluation, where community interest holders are invited to define the evaluation questions and goals using principles like community based participatory research. This collaborative approach extends through methodology, which uses responsive techniques like storytelling or focus groups to capture evidence through the community's own cultural lens and lived experience. And ultimately, this full democratic involvement in design, interpretation, and utilization shifts the power dynamics toward the impacted community, ensuring that the evaluation serves as an active tool for social justice, transformation, and capacity building, not just sheer analysis. The CREA approach also fundamentally transforms the role of the evaluator from a detached technical expert, admittedly, to an active partner committed to equity and social justice. And some of the core tenets of the evaluator's role in CREA is that they're not just like I said, a technical expert, but they're a cultural learner who positions themselves to move beyond singular quantitative approaches to embracing diverse epistemologies. They are a bridge builder, they should be a relationship steward, and the evaluator must commit to authentic community engagement and shared ownership. This builds trust. They also have to be a reflexive partner. Like you constantly in CREA, you have to maintain constant self awareness of your own lens, biases, and privilege. And this is really essential for credible findings, as the evaluator's identity and positionality it really influences the interpretation. What are some of the strengths of the CREA approach? So it prioritizes mixed methods, which is a fundamental strength because it's really intentional and it shifts power toward individuals and communities most impacted by the program, by like really incorporating those narratives like we mentioned before. And we kind of achieve this through methods like shared leadership and community engagement. Um, It also honors the historical evaluation practices where external experts encounters them. So culturally responsive evaluation isn't just theoretical. It's shaped by real national policy. One of the strongest examples that I can think of is the Harlem's Children's Zone, HCZ, was built around a cradle to career pipeline where children and families received layered supports from baby college for parents to academic tutoring, wellness supports, college access, and community based services. And what made HCZ powerful was not just the programs, but how they evaluated them. They didn't impose just the external measures. Instead, they asked families what success looked like, gathered data, and reflected cultural realities, and showed long-term incomes that mattered to the community. Because of that evaluation, policymakers saw replicable evidence, not just good intentions. And that documentation is what directly informed the federal Promise Neighborhood Initiative. Promise neighborhoods are essentially the national adoption of the HCZ model. The federal government began funding communities to build similar pipelines, starting early, staying consistent, and measuring what matters. These communities now invest in early childhood, family engagement, school success, mental health supports, attendance, college pathways, and long term economic mobility. Its evaluation scaled into policy. So, right now, there are over 900 HCZ scholars enrolled in college. More than 1,800 have graduated since the beginning of the program. Over 7,900 have completed baby college, and more than 7,600 people participate yearly in Healthy Harlem programs. More than 600 organizations have visited HCZ to replicate the model, and that's what evaluation looks like when you're able to turn it into generational impact. The same approach has been used locally here in Richmond, Virginia. When Richmond convened gun violence focus groups, culturally responsive evaluation ensured that residents were not just treated as data points, they shaped the insights. And their lived experience directly formed in, the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force in like 2022. Again, evaluation moves from reporting and can really, really lead to some serious structural change. So when we talk about CREA, we're talking about evaluation that doesn't sit on a shelf. We're talking about evaluation that redistributes authority, where community voice leads, evidence aligns with lived truths, and systems respond. HEZ was proof of that concept. You see it within the promised neighborhoods that's even scaling today. And local examples show what happens when we bring that same approach home. So there is power in CREA, policy changes, real investment shifts, and communities when communities can guide the solutions meant for them. But with any strength, right, in an approach, there are also areas of opportunity, and we want to look at some of that. Um, Doing a CREA can be really time and resource heavy, right? Because it just takes time to get through the stories. And to be quite frank, many evaluators lack training and cultural humility. There's also like this risk of tokenism or superficial inclusion. Funders usually also prefer standardized metrics over local priorities, which really can present a problem because if someone is funding you, you have to almost go along with their agenda or what they want. And also, there is also this, there might be this propensity to oversimplify culture. Korea has also been accused of having a lack of vigor. And to be honest, it's really harder to scale across large systems. There are a few threats to this approach as well. Um, Under this new administration, there's been a reduced emphasis on equity, which is a top down threat. Because if high level policy or government agencies step back from explicitly prioritizing social justice, the political mandate for CREA is weakened. It becomes harder to secure stable public funding and institutional buy in for CREA's goals of actively disarming systemic inequities. There also can be reliance on local and philanthropic leadership because federal support isn't inconsistent. And CREA often heavily relies on local leaders, community organizers, and specific foundation, which means that the success of a movement can be fragmented. It also can be unstable and dependent on the willingness and financial capacity of a few organizations or entities rather than a consistent system wide approach. There's also a pressure to standardize metrics, right? There's constant institutional pressure to be efficient, which usually means adopting cheap, standardized, and culture neutral metrics. We have to stay away from that. And this pressure directly conflicts with Korea's need for context specific mixed method approaches to achieve the multicultural validity, risking a return to the flawed, very flawed, one size fits all mentality. We looked at a risk of tokenism and service level and engagement, which is a threat to integrity, right? Stakeholders might adopt the language of cultural responsiveness without necessary or ethical financial backing or ethical commitment, which can lead to checkbox engagement, where communities are consulted but not given shared power, fundamentally undermining the core goal of shifting power dynamics in the first place. And there's also a threat of growing counter movements since CREA is a form of resistance against evaluative efforts that fail to recognize culturally defined values and naturally attracts opposition. So we see growing counter movements that actively reject equity focused frameworks, making the operating environment politically hostile for evaluators committed to social justice. And this also makes it challenging to navigate the polarization. The explicitly political nature of Korea means that it can get caught up in broader cultural or political antagonism. And the challenge for evaluators is to navigate these polarized waters without sacrificing the ethical mandate to kind of center social justice and the needs of communities who are most impacted. So let's talk about the future, specifically artificial intelligence in Korea. The problem is that AI is overwhelmingly being designed based on a single set of cultural values, mainly those common in European American contexts. And why does it matter? Isn't code just code? It matters because it creates bias and fails to serve a global population. And to prove this, researchers in one study looked at cultural psychology, specifically the concept of self construct, how people view themselves in relationship to the world. They looked at two main models: the independent self, which is more of a European American context. In this model, the self and the environment are seen as separate. The way you build your sense of self is by exerting control over your environment. So when these participants interacted with AI, they naturally prefer to seek control over the AI system. They wanted to be the boss of the machine, right? But the independent self, which was a Chinese context, that in that model in that environment is seen as active and powerful. There's a greater emphasis on harmony and connection. The research found that these participants rated it less important to control what AI does and more important to have a sense of personal connection with the AI. In fact, they preferred AI that had greater capacity to influence the person, more like a partner or a guide. And so, crucially, this research proved that deeply ingrained cultural models shape people's ideal relationship with AI systems. A one size fits all AI design will alienate huge portions of the global population. And this is why Korea is so vital for the future. We must use its principles to empirically examine and challenge the cultural biases in artificial intelligence. Our goal is to ensure the resulting technology is equitable and safe for everyone, not just one cultural group. I also think personally that we could also change direction as public funding is being threatened nationally. We can go private. Korea can really be used this approach in the private sector to like increase DEI accountability that just goes beyond simple head counts. We can assess how programs impact equity and social justice incomes for companies. We also can use it to improve market research by capturing what truly matters to diverse or segments of the diverse customers. We can move past simple statistical surveys and use culturally responsive focus groups and story making to empower customers to define value in their own terms. This gives companies nuanced context rich data that they simply can't get otherwise. CREA can also be used for workforce development and employee engagement. By applying CREA principles internally, we can use evaluation to foster organizational and personal growth. This approach really helps institutions and evaluators integrate equity focused principles into assessment practices, leading to stronger capacity building and better employee satisfaction. Corporate social responsibility and environmental, social, and governance reports can be more than marketing. CREA can help ensure that companies' reports are impactful, real, and defensible. It requires making defensible value judgments and demonstrating that um, a company's social efforts are not harming or marginalizing any group, which is key to achieving what Kirkhart talks about as multicultural validity. CREA can also be used in the corporate setting to avoid performative practices. To sustain CREA's integrity, we have to be vigilant against tokenism, which means we resist again checking like going down a checkbox. CREA also provides the framework for global businesses to adapt ethically. The AI research is a perfect example that we just discussed. And it also will help companies maintain a competitive advantage. Ultimately, CREA will give them better results. By increasing utility and use, our findings will be more relevant and actionable for local decision making, which really can lead to better policies, better programs, stronger communities, stronger companies in the long run. So, why am I so interested in CREA? It's very personal for me. Dr. Christina Edmondson, who's a clinical professor and a podcast influencer, she says that we are all a stack of stories. And so my personal lens, as a first generation daughter of Haitian and also African American, is what kind of guides me. It affirms that I must continually shift my posture from technical expert to a cultural learner, embracing rigorous reflexivity to check my own biases, right? And also, like, my passion is fueled up by the belief that my story can save someone else. And every story we collect through CREA, using the CREA method, can have that same transformative power. This conviction really drives my commitment to story making as an evaluation method. It is a perfect tool for qualitative data, allowing us to capture the nuanced, context rich data that drives policy. It also is a form of resistance against the status quo, ensuring that we challenge knowledge claims that delegitimizes the lives and values, especially of those who are most impacted. And I believe also through this work, we have a call to action as Simonette um, positions the evaluator as an instrument. My goal is to be a steward of use and action. I want to ensure that evaluation findings are not just beautiful reports, but they're relevant, they're accessible, and actively used by the community for advocacy and systems change. Um, in Haiti, when you ask in Creole, when you ask someone "sac passe," your response would be "naboule." This literally means I'm burning with life, and I really believe that it's an expression of the creative splendor. This commitment comes from a place of deep faith. When we share our stories and hear the stories of the community, I believe it's the creative communicating splendor, and over again. The spiritual conviction translates to my professional fire. When people ask me sac passe and we say naboule, it means I am burning with life. So doing this work literally is like fire in my bones. I want to thank you all for coming today and learning a little bit more about CREA.